Hey guys, good morning. This is Jason Flame, host of the Master Motivation Podcast. Excited to be back with another, not just an amazing guest, but truly a legend in the martial arts. This is Joe Corley, who is a legendary figure in the American martial arts and one of the founding fathers of U.S. kickboxing. He co-created the Battle of Atlanta World Karate Championship, which just celebrated its 57th year and served as its leader for the first 45. As a broadcaster and a promoter, Joe helped launch the careers of some of the sport's greatest champions and produced over 1,000 hours of televised martial arts content across major networks. Today, he heads PKA Worldwide, bringing a bold global vision to the next generation of martial artists. A lifelong student of personal growth and longevity, Joe blends timeless martial arts discipline with a mission to cultivate excellence, assertiveness, and strength in both body and mind. Mr. Corley, thank you for being on the show today.
Happy to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. You just had the Battle of Atlanta. We were talking about that a little bit before the show started. How'd it go this year?
I love the battles of Atlanta now that I'm not having to spend 10 months every year working on it. I get to show up, smile, shake hands, and see a lot of people that I like and admire. This year we had Mike Stone here, and I got a chance to spend time with him and get my intellect and IQ peaked. And so it was a lot of fun.
Excellent, excellent. And to all of the people that are watching here live or will watch this later, if you have any questions, you have any comments, any thoughts that you want to share with us on the show, if you're watching live, we'll be able to address those immediately. But again, if you have any questions for me or for Joe, please post those in the comments and do us a favor, share this video and go to Master Motivation Podcast on YouTube and subscribe now. So, Mr. Corley, you've been a leader in the martial arts for over 6 decades. What first drew you to the martial arts? And did you ever imagine it would shape your entire life's mission?
Great question. When my dad was career Army, and he came from an era where when kids had problems with one another in school, they had a boxing ring in the school where he went, and they would throw 4 gloves in the ring and tell the kids to go in and work it out. At age 10, I was weighing 60 pounds, and my dad said, well, you're not a very big person, and it could be that as we move now to Austria and Germany, there will be bigger kids in the neighborhood who will want to fight with you. So I'm going to teach you some fundamentals of boxing. So he taught me the jab and the right cross primarily. And I used it effectively as we ended up on these different Army bases. Actually had my first actual fight in Würzburg, Germany, against a kid that was double my weight. And my dad had said, if you land a good punch, they'll probably want to be your friend thereafter. And that's exactly the way it worked. So we lost him when I was 10 years old to lung cancer. And we came back to the States. He died in Walter Reed Hospital. And the first day my mom took me to day camp there was a kid out on the playground throwing rocks at a squirrel, and I asked him politely to stop throwing the rocks at the squirrel, and he impolitely said, make me. So I hit him with an uppercut in the body, and he turned purple. The big woman that ran the camp came out and said, what's going on here, boys? And I said, he was trying to hurt the squirrel. I told him to stop. He said, make me. So I hit him in the stomach, and now he's on the ground purple. She said, okay. So she went back in the house, and that was great. Later in the day, parents would come to pick up their kids, and this same kid was going around pushing other kids in the place, and he came back, and he had forgotten what happened that morning. So I proactively hit him again. He did the same kind of thing, just as his mom walked in, and she said, oh, and she was embarrassing me. She said, oh, if my child ever does anything like this to anybody, you have to let me know. I said, I don't think you have to worry about that. He'll probably be on the floor a lot. And so I was embarrassed. So I walked out and walked down to the hospital. The reason I'm telling this story is to kind of create the relationship with my dad. Walked down to the hospital where he was dying of lung cancer. He said, what are you doing here? I told him the story, and his response was, are you hungry? And then he gave me his meal. So he was in an era where you settled these kind of differences, and you didn't go tattling and, reprimanding kids for if you were a boy, you were treated like a boy, and so that was great. We lost him about 2 or 3 weeks after that. Then when I got back to Georgia Military Academy, I think I ended up with the record of fights there. So it's just one of those things that was built in from my dad, even though I only had him for 10 years.
That's an amazing story. And,
Did I
and, and
think it would change my life? No, I did. I did not. When I first started, I had no idea.
yeah, and I think that's just such an amazing story, and to hear, kind of the old school, right? I think that's what everybody now would call it. Is just that's the old school mindset, and
Yeah.
things were just settled that way, and that was just the way it was, and that was normal. And um, I don't think that type of thought process goes on today. I think it's all the things that you said that it wasn't right. You didn't go tattle on someone. You didn't, you know, it just got handled. And so, how did that evolve over years, in your life, or is that kind of a constant?
I only had a few more kind of situations like that I had that I won't say I had to fight in, that I chose to fight in. Uh, One of the things that Mike Stone was big about in his speeches this last weekend is what we choose to do, not what we have to do. I wasn't obligated to hit people later. I chose to hit them later. And, uh, but those are some of my favorite stories. And one of the real important things that I like about what Jordan Peterson has to say is that men should be monsters who are under control, not weenies. He doesn't use the word weenies, but not weenies who pretend that they're controlling themselves so that they won't hurt anybody.
Mm,
And he says that women even prefer guys that have that monster ability but keep it under control. So
hmm.
that's another good reason to do that.
Yeah, I love it, and that again comes from a different mindset, and I think that the martial arts still continues to foster that mindset of having the ability. The other one, the quote about being a gosh, I'm going to ruin it. I'm going to just butcher it, but being a warrior in a garden, and having the
Yes.
tools,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
not and
Not a
and not
gardener in a
always.
war. Yeah.
Correct,
Yeah.
right? And so, martial arts has really shaped your life. Love your cup, by the way. Um, Tell me now a little bit
Yeah.
more about the Battle of Atlanta. It just celebrated 57th anniversary. What does that milestone mean to you personally, and how has the event evolved, or how has the event evolved since you founded it?
Well, when we first did our first event, we called it the Southeast U.S. Championship, and then when the writer wrote it up in Black Belt magazine, he called it the Battle of Atlanta. So the next year it was called the Battle of Atlanta, and of course the Battle of Atlanta was a huge conflict in the Battle of the States, in the Civil War, and so that caught on. Then a lot of people copied it around the country, Battle of Baltimore and all these other kinds of things. The first year we had 26 black belts, and out of the 26, seven of them were in the top 10. And so Joe Louis won the first Battle of Atlanta, and Joe Hayes was the lightweight champion. And so we had a great turnout of. I was competing, I was ranked in the top 10 at the time, and so when we held it, people came, and our stated mission was to always treat everyone fairly. And in my expert, in my background as a fighter, I realized that if I went to the West Coast, the referees were prejudiced for the West Coast. If I went to New York, they were prejudiced like that. And I just want to have a tournament where anybody from anywhere could win. And that was the official's job. And then when we formed the Southeast Karate Association a few years later, that was also our position in the SEKA, that the officials, if we found an official being biased, we kicked him to the curb. We just didn't let that happen. So that was really the start. And so it became known as a fighters tournament for that reason, that you didn't have to come in and beat somebody 3-1 in order to win the match. You know, you could just beat them by 1 point and win the match. You didn't have to fight the officials as well.
Mm-hmm. And you're talking about 3 points. You know, a lot of the tournaments now go to the 5 points or to the unlimited points and continuous. But back in the day, that was it. It was first to three. Everything was worth 1 point. And like you said, it was often a challenge, not just fighting your competitor, but being able to work the ring to be able to show the right judges the points that you wanted to be seen. I mean, that was really a true art.
Yeah. Yeah, in the SCKA, we came up with a no see, no vote rule. We would say silly little logical things like, well, if you're in the restroom doing the number one and I come in and ask you what you thought about a point out in the ring, you would look at me like I was an idiot. And if you were in the ring and you weren't in position to see the point, and I ask you what you think about the point, and you put your hands down because you couldn't see it, then I would think you were an idiot. So um, if we trained the judges, we actually had them do videos and let them watch their own calls and see the video, what actually happened back in slow motion, so that they would, at least for a few minutes, gain a sense of humility about how flawed their vision was from time to time, so they could really work on it. You know, every official in the world thinks he sees everything exactly as it happens, but they're pretty poor, often pretty poor eyewitnesses. So when we gave them the ability to say no see, no vote, we gave them permission to be intelligent looking. And we were overridden around the country. Other people couldn't figure it. They say, well, two is a majority of three, so I need two to call a point. And I said, why? You're gonna ask people who weren't in position to see what their opinion is, and then hold that against the fighter. So again, we try to make it all for the sake of the fighters. They're the ones that put in the hard work. They're the ones that need to get the right kind of attention.
Well, and going back to those early years, I mean that sounds to me pretty proactive, using video and using training for the officials, because I've been involved with a lot of tournaments that you just kind of wonder if this is their first time, you know, being an official. It's the first time that they've ever been in the ring, and so to actually train them and to coach them and to help them to understand that. What are some other things that you helped kind of put the advantage back to the fighters and back to the sport, to make sure that it was a fighters tournament and to make sure that it was as unbiased as possible?
Well, we picked up on a plan. I think Mike Anderson first used it, where he used more than 1 point. Like if you scored a kick, you got 2 points. We added to that, if you scored a flying kick of some kind, a jump kick of some type, then you would get 3 points. So that made that more exciting for the fans, and it gave a fighter who was down by 3 points a way to catch up with one spectacular technique. We did that, which we thought was good. Then we came up with organized. We thought about everything that would make it more appealing, not only to the live audience but to television, and then we corrected. And then Jay Will from Ohio, as our center referee in the PKA, we would always fly to and from the events on the same flight, so we could in real time change anything that wasn't good the weekend before. We didn't have to go to a committee. We didn't have to fly to DC and go into the Capitol building or any of that kind of stuff to change rules, because we could see from common sense what needed to be done at the time. So it happened. A lot of those things happened. Then we would get to some grand championship matches and say, well, you really are going to have 3 rounds of 2 minutes each. And then when we did the Atomics Challenge, we let people start really smacking one another, like grown-ups would do, to get real points. And so the definition, which we used to have, was you're throwing a blow which would have, if you hadn't controlled it, incapacitate the receiver at least momentarily. And if it was that, then you got a point. And if it wasn't, then the referee would say, not enough power. And so we actually were giving people a little feedback while they were going, and he was mic'd, so he was telling the audience what they were saying. The bad news, Jason, is if you're in karate, people in your family come to watch a karate tournament, but nobody else does. The same as softball. So the difference in softball and baseball is that in baseball, you throw 100-mile-an-hour pitches and people fill up the stadiums to watch you do that. And if you throw underhand, nobody that you don't know comes to watch that unless it gets a TV deal of some kind. But so we tried to make point fighting like baseball.
Got it. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on groin, no groin as points?
I say no groin, just like in the PKA we say no leg kicks. How many sports in the world is an athlete given credit for destroying the legs of another athlete? How many sports in the world are given credit for even partially eliminating the testicles of another opponent? I mean, it was one of those things where you say, well, I'm going to take this gun right here and I'm going to shoot myself in the foot as I try to build this sport. And it never made any sense. Never made any sense. Yeah.
And how about the 3 points for turning kicks or the kicks falling away, things like that? I think you kind of addressed it when you talked about what defines an actual point. But how do we get away with how do we get away from as I would call it, the flash of the martial arts in the point world when it's not really an effective point?
Well, I never could make sense of how something would be the flash if you actually felt it wouldn't work because you were falling down in the middle of it. And again, we went back to the thing. We had to assume that the referees and officials that we trained knew the difference in a blow that would incapacitate someone at least momentarily. So if you hit me with a right cross and I drop my arms and I'm staggered momentarily, and you come behind that with a left hook and a left round kick, then I'm probably going to be hurt. So we use that whole premise in the point fighting. What is it that would incapacitate the guy long enough for you to really drop him, right? And not just have him say, ouch, but, really be incapacitated. But you controlled it. Again, it's like back to Jordan Peterson's concept of being an animal, and having that blow land. And, safety punch was sometimes blamed for the way it went, but it wasn't really the safety point. It was the refusal of the promoters and the officials to stick by their earlier guns of it had to be a really good technique with power, and for the ones that went to eighth grade, they learned that force equal mass times acceleration. So if it looked to them like there was enough mass and acceleration in the blow that went with the control, then it should be a point. And if it wasn't, it shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. And talk about, the I'm trying to look for the right word, legal responsibility or the fear of any legal issues with too much contact, people getting hurt, people getting, talk about that a little bit, as to why some tournaments will allow a little bit more contact than others.
Important point there. In the SCKA, we said the following: if you, as a fighter, want to run in against me as a fighter and reach out and grab me by my uniform and hold me so that you can hit me and expect me to just do nothing about that, then you're not doing a smart thing. So we made a rule that said, if you run in on somebody and you get hit full power by that person and you fall down, you're going to lose a point, right? In other words, you caused yourself to get hit that hard. Guess what it did? It lowered the number of accidents in the event. Why? Because those people became responsible for their own safety. They didn't count on the rules for safety. And they were fighters that they were notorious for second punching and third punching you and sweeping you to the ground and stomping you after you control the punch that they came in on. And when they got in kickboxing, guess who did the worst? Those guys, because they got hit first by people who weren't controlling it in kickboxing. So we felt that was there were people that whined about it, but in our very first tournament, in our very first match in the SEKA in Columbia, South Carolina, a fighter from North Carolina came rushing in and was on the ground. He wasn't unconscious, but his nose was bleeding, and the other person got a point, and he couldn't continue, so he lost. And everybody saw that, and they went, "Whoa, this is new!" But it really caught on well, and the Southeast Karate Association produced people like Keith Vitale and people like that over the years. Bobby Tucker, Sam Chapman, a lot of really, really good fighters came out of SEKA as a result of that.
Well, thanks for addressing some of those questions that I had. Want to talk a little bit more about the careers of some of the legends like Bill Wallace, Rick Rufus. What qualities did you see in these fighters early on that told you they were destined for greatness?
Well, I saw Bill Wallace up close since I was his first title defense, and I had already fought him twice in point matches, and he had won both of those. So we called 10,000 of our closest friends into the Omni to watch his fight in his first title defense. And through a number of things that I won't go into right now, but it included Ted Turner and CBS and all that, I ended up back in as the vice president of the PKA with CBS asking me to do the commentary on Bill Wallace's fights. And so they loved the name Superfoot, and I always joke with him and tell him I let him win because he had such a catchy name, and we could promote him better that way. But I did the commentary every 3 months on his fights. Rick Rufus asked Jeff Smith and me when he was 12 years old if we could help him become the champion of the world one day. And so when he was 19 at the Battle of Atlanta, he won his first world title. And then when he was 29, he fought Jean-Yves Thériault in Canada. Thériault was 39 on that night. And so I had considered Rick Rufus, after all, was the GOAT. He was the greatest of all time in our sport, along with Jean-Yves Thériault, who he fought on that particular event, Karate Mania 8. So it's easy to see, when we did a piece on Joe Louis when he was sick in the hospital with cancer, we talked about how Webster defined charisma. And so you can feel charisma when people have it. And so we tried to put those kind of people in the ring, and those would be the kind of people we put in the striker's cage. We're going to be fighting in a cage with the new PKA, and we'll call it the striker's cage. And we learned that, if you're in a 90-degree corner ring, you have fewer places to go than you do in a 170-degree angle or 130-degree angle in a cage. And so it'll make the fighting that much better for kickers as we go forward, as an aside.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. As the voice of the PKA, Professional Karate Association, for so many years, what was your most memorable broadcast moment, and why does it still stand out today?
The very first show that I did, I got to call the fight between Bill Wallace and Blinky Rodriguez, between Benny Urquidez and Howard Jackson, and between Ross Scott and Everett Eddy. And that was really something. I didn't have any idea what I was going to be doing, but I had such a good broadcast partner in Gary Bender from CBS that it was really something. So I'll always remember that first event and how good Benny Urquidez was, and how good Bill Wallace was, and how good Ross Scott was on that night. But then I had one of our fighters, Jerry Rome, got a detached retina, and when they let Ray Leonard back in boxing, we let Jerry Rome back in kickboxing, and he knocked out Bad Brad Hefton with a little punch that traveled about 6 inches. because we had Evander Holyfield come in and train with Jerry Rome in a tiny ring. And if Jerry Rome didn't come off the ropes punching, Evander Holyfield just brutalized him. And so that was a great moment when Brad Hefton got, really clotheslined with a short little punch like that. That was memorable. And then later, Jerry Rome would get stopped by Dennis Alexio. And then it was a lot of those fights. But Jean-Yves Thériault's fights were incredible because he knocked people down with his right hand, his left hand, his right leg, his left leg. He was just the most powerful guy we had. And he's a guy, when I talked to ChatGPT, it came back and set up a little dialogue for me where I said, when I saw this guy, I thought I was seeing the Clint Eastwood assertiveness program in action, and that guy was Jean-Yves Thériault. Quiet, unassuming, and just beat the absolute snot out of you.
Yeah, wow. Well, as I listen to you talk about all these just amazing fighters, and I'm not sure if the audience is fully aware of the legends that we're talking about. I mean, these are people that really set in place, people that go into history as the greatest martial artists of all time.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? And looking back on all of those years of coming up with and promoting with all of these amazing martial artists.
One of my favorite books over the past few years has been called God Winks, When God Winks at You. So all the things that happened that ended up putting me in that position come down to God winks. And if I take that back to my dad coming home from a deployment and my mom having me in a pair of white shoes and him saying, "Get the white shoes off that boy. Boys don't wear white shoes." And all the way through all the things, including the getting busted from captain to sergeant in the military school because I had a fight the day before, and the commander Brewster said, "Corley, what do you have to say for yourself?" And I said, "Looks like a good hammer fist, sir." And being now 40 hours on bull ring for the rest of the year, never getting off bull ring, I think all those things led to a thing. One of them that's worth mentioning is Ted Turner had just started something called the Superstation. It was like 2 months old. And I got a meeting with somebody in his building because one of my private students was the chairman of Cox Enterprises, which owns Cox Cable and Cox Community. I mentioned to him I wanted to talk to Ted Turner. The next day, Ted Turner's office called me and said, "Come in, Ted's setting up a meeting for you." So I meet with a guy who's got no personality. He's got no interest in what we're talking about. I tell him how great it's all going to be and all that. And he looks at me and says, "We're not interested." So I packed up my stuff. On the way out the door, I hear a voice behind me that says, "Hey, karate guy, what would you do with this?" I turn around and there's Ted Turner, and he's got a sword in his hand, just like I had before I was busted down from captain in the military school. As it turns out, he had been to Georgia military academy for 1 year, and they had expelled him because they didn't know he needed lithium in those days. So I put my hands up in fighting stance. I started walking towards him. I said, "Well, if you knew what you were doing with that sword, I think I would leave right now, but I think I'll just beat you to death." And so I started walking at him, and he starts swinging the sword at me, walking backwards. And then he says, wait, I've got an idea. So he calls all of his executives into the office. It's a little small house was his office at the time. He points at me, he says, "Corley, you're the little guy, right?" And I said, "Right." I guess he knew who I was from reading the Atlanta newspapers and things, because I got some coverage. He said, "So you need the Superstation, right?" And I said, "Right." He said, "Well, next week, the producer of All in the Family is trying to, in Congress, we're having a hearing next week in Congress, and they're trying to shut down the Superstation so they won't let me broadcast outside of Atlanta." He said, "Will you come up and testify for me?" And I said, "Yes, I'll be happy to do that." He said, "What can I do for you?" The jerk that I was talking to said, "Ted, I already told him we're not interested." He looked at him and said, "Shut up, Sid." And so we put the event on. It was a great event. I had this great material in my hands. And I go to New York and I go to CBS, and he says, "Joe, we're CBS, and you see in the corner that says WTCG." And we don't broadcast things from other networks, but you speak so well about the sport. I want you to be the commentator for the Bill Wallace fight in Las Vegas next month. And I said, I don't think the PKA guys are going to let me do that because we don't get along. It's a man and woman running it at the time, and I just couldn't stand them. He said, well, screw them. If they don't let you do it, we won't do the event. I said, wonderful. And the event was brought to them by IMG, so it was the most powerful, so that's where they hugged me and said, we're all really good friends. Why don't you be our vice president now? And in about 10 years, we'll screw you again. So it's a lot of good fun to that stuff.
Well, tell us more about your vision for PKA Worldwide. How is it different from what's come before, and what impact do you hope it has on the global martial arts community?
The simple version is we are to MMA what soccer is to NFL. Soccer and NFL are both called football. Football on the one hand, football on the other. The rules are totally different. The players are totally different. The fans are totally different. The culture is totally different. If you enjoy MMA and you enjoy leg kicks and takedowns and grappling on the ground, that's called combat sports. What we do is called combat sports, and we're just different. And we figure there's 100 million of us around the world that do karate, taekwondo, and kung fu, and out of those 100 million will come the country champions, the city champions, the continental champions, and the world champions that everybody will want to see. And I think we'll do well.
Excellent. So I got to ask you about this, because this was something I was curious. You often talk about Clint Eastwood assertiveness. Can you unpack that philosophy and how it applies both inside and outside the dojo? Tell me about it.
Well, if you're too young to have watched the Clint Eastwood movies, it's worth pulling them up and then watch the one where he says, "Go ahead, make my day." And then another one where he says, "I know what you're thinking, punk, because in all of this confusion, I kind of lost track myself. This is a 44 handgun, the most powerful weapon in the world. Blow your head clean off. Well, do you feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?" And he was very calm, very collected about that, not excited. Slowly walked down the street, to confront this guy who had been shooting his weapon at people. And that ties in with, the way my dad laid it out about the self-defense. All of that makes sense. And as opposed to you have WWE where the guys are great, they're boisterous. You have, most of the combat sports things now are, guys talking to one another in a way, and if that's normal for them, you let it happen, but you don't build it up. So that's why I like Jean-Yves Theriault. He walks in the ring very calm and then just destroys you. Again, it's back to that Jordan Peterson thing. It's an animal that's under control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for sharing
that. Talk softly, and carry a big 44 is the subtitle.
And I'm just curious, how many people are watching that may have never ever seen a Clint Eastwood movie. I know that my dad was a huge fan, so I got to watch a lot of them. But I get that calm, cool, but just still has that animal inside, right?
Yeah, same as when he was the man with no name in the spaghetti westerns. He carried that forward into the Dirty Harry movies and all that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've produced over 1,000 hours of martial arts programming across major networks. What challenges did you face getting mainstream media to embrace the sport, and how did you overcome them?
Well, Don King and Bob Arum hated kickboxing. They did everything they could to undercut it all along the way. And so that was the main thing we had to overcome. There was a boxing announcer sports announcer on ABC Sports named Jim McKay. And his real name was Jim McManus. His son was Sean McManus, who was the vice president of sports at NBC. And when I moved to New York to work with ESPN, and when in the second year they were on the air, I took Sean to the New York Athletic Club, did a private lesson with him there, and he actually ended up liking the sport, and then he went over to CBS later. And then IMG set up the deal for us with ESPN. And so Chet Simmons was the president of ESPN, and we had a good relationship with him. uh, Chet Simmons brought in from NBC his director of sports sales, and he was the vice president of programming at ESPN. His name is Bob Gutkowski. He left and became the president of Madison Square Garden. So he brought the Knicks and the Rangers and all that. He brought the Stanley Cup back there, and uh, he has been the nicest person we ever met in sports programming. He's now our vice chairman in PKA. So he's a person that has the relationships with all these people that I got to know over the years. But there's sometimes you can't get out of the role that someone met you in, and that's kind of what happens. But
Mm-hmm.
he's already highly respected by everyone, and so we've got the right team. Wallace is our official ambassador. Jeff Smith is our president of sports operations. And so we've got the right people for the right jobs in PKA now.
Excellent. I feel like maybe we skipped a section that I never even got to talk about at the beginning.
Yeah.
We haven't really talked about your personal martial arts background and how you got started. I know you said at 10 years old, your dad showed you some lessons in boxing. Is that where
Yeah.
it started, and how did that lead to your formal martial arts training?
Well, like my dad said, you're a 60-pound 10-year-old and, people bigger than you. And so the fights that I got in before martial arts, it was the jabs and crosses that he learned. Uh, I had one tie in those matches, and it was because I was a gold belt in karate at the time, and I was fighting a wrestler from the school. And I got out there and I put my hands up and I looked at my hands. I said, I don't know what I'm doing with these. I haven't even started sparring yet. I better close my hands. And so I just kept jabbing him in the face. And he came in, did a double leg takedown against me. And I didn't knee him in the face because we didn't dirty fight. And after 3 minutes, he said, if I let you up, will you quit hitting me in the face? And I said, yes, I will, because I'm tired. And so I realized that bigger people, and I saw psychopaths. Jordan Peterson talks about psychopaths, and there's 5% of the people in the world that you could run into that are psychopaths, and they don't have any feeling for you at all. Those are people that shoot you and stab you and stomp your brains out. I said, I'm going to need something to help me, and so ended up with a great Korean instructor, Kim Dae-shik, and my natural competitive drive was there. So I started entering tournaments, won some brown belt state championships, and then won the Southeast Championship, and then went to New York, started fighting. That's where I got to meet Chuck Norris. He called me to California, and Pat Johnson became my big brother that I never had, and taught me a lot of great stuff. And so I got ranked in the top 10 in point fighting. The kickboxing, when I was fighting, I was at one point ranked number 7 when I fought Wallace, and he beat up everybody else before that. So I got moved up to the number 1 contender spot, but all the fights fell through. So that's about the same time I got, I guess, enlisted into the other parts, the commentary and all that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you brought up two names that are, really close to my legacy. My instructor is Dennis Ichikawa,
Oh,
trained
wow.
by Pat
Yeah.
Johnson and Chuck
Yeah.
Norris. So
Yeah. He
I'd
was
love
in
to
the
hear
school. He
because
was in the school when I first went out to work out with Pat. Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
okay, how cool.
Yeah.
Tell me,
Sherman
tell me
Oaks.
more about your
Yeah.
experience with Pat Johnson and Chuck Norris. I love to hear stories about them and hear about their history.
Well, like I say, I was a Southeast karate champion, and the martial arts in the Southeast kind of grew up around the Battle of Atlanta. Um, and so when I got out there, it was for a Karate Illustrated magazine shoot. When I met Chuck in New York, he invited me out to train, and so I came out. When I was out there, he was already busy doing a movie, so he turned me over to Pat Johnson. So Pat taught me all the sweeps and all the things that you guys did there, and under his and Chuck's tutelage. And so uh, he really was. He was like my dad and my older brother both in terms of his wisdom and all that stuff. Great sense of humor, very smart, very charismatic, and so I credit him really with all the future successes that I had, both in the point fighting and in the kickboxing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. I love,
Yeah.
again, love hearing their names come
Oh,
up and love
well,
hearing
this
more
is a
history.
God wink. This is a God wink that you would have trained with Dennis and Pat Johnson. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really something.
Absolutely, absolutely. Unfortunately, I only had a couple opportunities to train with Mr. Johnson, but Mr.
Yeah.
Chikawa has been. I started with him in 1985, and to this day, still continue to
Ah,
train with him and
please say
Mark
hello
Cox.
for me. Give him a big hug. Yeah.
I will. I
Yeah.
will. Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Let's talk about some. You're a big advocate for longevity and follow the work of a couple of doctors, and where your habits and your routines have made a really big difference in your health and your energy over the years. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Uh, I can't remember how it started, but Dr. Robert Goldman, if everybody looks for him on Facebook, he's the one that started this seminars called A4M, and he owns dozens of patents around the world. Uh, and he was an advocate with Jack LaLanne way back when. So as a
Mhm.
teenager, he was a Jack LaLanne guy. But he holds these great seminars. We go to them every December in Las Vegas. And it was there that I first saw Peter Attia speak. Jeff Smith was with me, and he actually made his presentation based on Muhammad Ali's strategy of what he was doing against George Foreman. So that got our attention. And so um, he said that he wrote a book called Outlive, which is a must read for everybody. And Outlive, he says that what he came out of medical school into was medicine 2.0. In medicine 2.0, you you had these things happen to you. The four horsemen of death he calls cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. And you have to catch those things early. CHAD, CHAD is the way I remember them as the acronym that I put together. And he says, catch these things early and then treat them. And people that have centenarian genes, they won't get those things until later in life. So they'll live close to 100 years old, but they'll die of the same things. They'll just die of them much later. So then the guy from the Harvard School, David Sinclair, was also a speaker at the thing, and tied in with him is 120 is the new 80 is the kind of thing that he talks about. So they think that we're given a body that could live to be 120 years old before it just completely wears out. But now the theme is if you can live another 10 years, then the AI is going to get us to a place where we'll be able to live to 120. So um, I signed up with Tony Robbins does a group that's called Life Force, and they send people to your house every 3 months and take your blood, and then you talk to a clinician about what's going on. And then there's more expensive things you can do that you can that cost close to $2,000, where they look at all your blood, do an entire body scan for you, and tell you, what's all going right and going wrong with you.
Mm. And how's your physical regiment? How often do you train? What's your favorite way to train? What's your daily routine training?
I like to train 5 or 6 days a week, following the Peter Attia approach. You want to get into your what he calls VO2 max. You want to have 30 minutes of cardio, and in that 30 minutes of cardio, have 20% of that be VO2 max, where you couldn't carry on a conversation in that. The rest of the time, you're breathing and all that, but you could carry on a conversation. But in VO2 max, you can. He said that's one of the greatest indicators of your longevity, and as is your grip strength. But it's grip strength that you've developed over years, holding on to barbells and doing those things to strengthen your muscles. So he says that he says to all of his clients these days in his medicine 3.0, what are the top things that you want to do? He has them check them off, gives them a list of 100 things. what are all the things you want to do in the last decade of your life? Do you want to be able to lift your grandchildren and play with them? Do you want to be able to reach down and tie your shoes? Do you want to be able to scratch your back? Do you want to be able to take the top off of a jar? So those are things you check off. Well, if you want to do that stuff, you got to have the musculature to do it. And
Hmm.
so he says we're all going to decline, but we're going to change the rate of decline. So by keeping yourself strong and all that. So, and so many of us have grown up watching, if you're a fourth degree black belt, you've got a size 4 belt. If you're fifth degree, you got a size 5 belt. If you're 10th degree, you got a size 10 black belt. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be like Chuck Norris and just keep training. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Hmm. Yeah, I find myself very fortunate that I still absolutely love to train. Actually, just started jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and you talk about grip strength, and you talk
Yeah,
about that VO2.
yeah,
Man, five rounds of 5 minutes of rolling, and my hands and forearms are
yeah.
maxed. And I feel like I could definitely not carry a conversation between. So it sounds like maybe I'm on the right track and just keep on
Yeah,
going. But that's
yeah,
that's always been my goal, is that a lot of people ask me, what are you going to do when you retire? And like, number one, retiring from something I love doesn't sound all that great. I mean, if I get to teach and
no,
train martial arts for the rest of my life, I'm going to be super happy. But
yeah,
also continue to, I want to live a long time, right? So I think that that's the key to staying young, is to keep moving and keep training, right?
yeah, and not retiring.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta have something. If it's something where you're just going and giving back, whatever you can do, but spend time that. Yeah, that's a lot of. And I like I say in his book Outlive, it's very very informative like that, and all of Jordan Peterson's work is great with respect to all of those things.
And how did you get turned on to Jordan Peterson? You bring him up a lot. You talk about his thoughts, philosophies. How were you introduced to him, and how has that changed your mindset from maybe what before?
Well, in Canada, they told him and the other professors in Ontario that they were going to use 19 pronouns as prescribed by their students. And he said, I'm not going to do that. In the Western world, you can tell us what not to say. We can't call people these names, but you're not going to tell us what I have to call them. So I'm just not going to do it. So he became really big on YouTube, and YouTube is 80% men. And so he became really big among men. And anybody that doesn't know him, if they just put in Jordan Peterson, put in BBC, and you'll see one of his early interviews with a woman that tried to cut him down in the way he just, you talk about jujitsu, he had her tied up in so many knots, she couldn't even breathe. And he looked at her and he said something, and her mouth moved. She went, and no sound came out. And he pointed at her and said, Gotcha. In other words, he listened to the garbage that she was saying and tied her brain up in a knot where she couldn't speak. It was just such a classic move. But I was a big proponent of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Everything that Stephen R. Covey said, I thought was genius. He was like Yoda. And he died in 2012. So I didn't have anybody in the world that was the smartest man. And then Jordan Peterson came along. I'm guessing his IQ is probably at 180. And I've just never seen him flustered or flabbergasted at all. He is and if you watch his daughter, Michaela, interview him and his wife, Tammy, then you can say to yourself, that's the kind of family I would like to have. That is the model family. And he's just incredible. I mean, he's probably right behind Joe Rogan. And if you watch him and do the interviews with Joe Rogan, they admire each other so much. It's incredible.
Yeah. Good stuff. Really good stuff. Well, looking ahead, what legacy do you hope to leave behind, not just in the martial arts, but in the lives of the people that you've inspired and mentored along the way?
My my Mike Stone said something the other day. He said, "Do you feel?" He said he doesn't feel an obligation to do things for his families, and people are just taken aback. He says, "I, I, I'm happy for the opportunity that I have to do things with my family. And that one little word changes your whole thing from obligation to opportunity. So, so I've been thinking a lot about that, and that was, I guess, maybe Sunday when he said that out loud. So I've been thinking about, I would like to have the opportunity to instill the kind of things that we were talking about in as large an audience as possible, and have our PKA athletes represent those kinds of things that Jordan Peterson, Stephen Covey, and Clint Eastwood had to say over these years about the way you deliver it. They'll give us the content, and Clint will give us the delivery method, the way we say that, so that we don't have to bring in a Pete Hegseth to raise the number of people that want to go out and defend our country. Everybody will want to do that, and not to let weenies, you know, it's insulting to people when you call them soy boys or you call them beta males and all that. But if we could not have many of those, if we could have, you know, Clint Eastwood types coming up, you know, then, I mean, you know, I wrote my thesis on the Roman Empire, copied it from Encyclopedia Americana, and it took me days to copy it word for word. But in doing that, I learned that we have not lasted yet 1/3 as long as the Roman Empire did. And when it was decayed because of those guys you saw Russell Crowe having to deal with when he was the gladiator, you know. So we need that kind of Clint Eastwood world, and that's the legacy I would love for the PKA to be able to bring. And if I could play a role in that, I would love to.
Well, and I'm curious, what do you believe has led us in that direction and allowed men to, trying to use the right words, but what do you think has led to not having as strong of male figures?
Honestly, I believe it started with George Orwell when he was a socialist in England back in the 1920s, and that the socialists slash to be communists of the world have sown chaos everywhere they could possibly sow it, to burn down. We've heard these phrases now for years. You know, if you were alive during the Vietnam era, I was called to a frat house one time, and they said, we're going to go to Chicago this weekend, and there's going to be a bunch of pigs there. They're going to try to tell us what to do. We want to be able to beat up those pigs. They didn't say beat up, but I'll be clean about it. I said, so let me make sure I got this. I'm a 3rd-degree black belt. You've asked me to come to your house here so you could spit on policemen there in Chicago, and you want me to show you what to do to keep them from beating the crap out of you. They said, yes. I said, I'm sorry, you've called the wrong person. And so I left. So what George Orwell, you know, who ended up writing the book 1984, I don't know if you ever got to read it or not, but I had to read it in high school, and it kind of set the tone of what they were going to do to teach us the way to think. So if you watch certain networks now, they're going to tell you what to think. And the teachers that they have seeded into our schools since those hippie days and from the Vietnam era have trained the minds of people to be like what we're talking about. It's not their fault. They were not born that way, but they have been educated that way, sadly. That's what I think has happened, and that's my story. I'm sticking to it, and I can't undo that. But I think we can, through martial arts, be part of what goes forward. And I've got a plan to do that, and it would be through Chuck Norris's Kickstart Kids program, actually.
That's great. Well, I'm a firm believer like you that martial arts can change a lot of things, and we do change lives every single day, and so we have that ability. Is there anything that we have not talked about that maybe you want to share with the audience today before we close?
No, I don't think so. I think we hit on most of it. Our website is pkakickboxing.com, and we're continuing to build it out. But people that don't know about those great fighters that you talked about will be able to go back there and see some of the great videos. And they have a chance to, if they want to, become members of PKA. And if they did, then they would have access to libraries and libraries and libraries, and they could watch these people fight, not just for their own entertainment, but to see techniques that they might want to turn around and teach people who thinks that an open hand back fist to the face with your arm fully extended is going to help you in self-defense, so that they would be seeing people doing techniques that would be really helpful to them. And they'd get to know the stars. And they're out there. I mean, out of these 100 million people around the world, we're going to have some fantastic athletes who are going to be even better than the ones that were, in our glory days of PKA.
Great. Well, thanks again for being on the show and sharing time with me and telling me some stories. I just love hearing the history of martial arts. I love hearing about all these legends. I love watching those videos of those old school fights. I just came across, and it gets posted every now and again. It's about a 2-minute video of the early days of, point fighting karate, where it just looks so different than I might see in some areas today, of just, some old school, Benny Urquidez, Bill Wallace, Joe Louis, just all those guys just duking it out. But what always gets me is at the end, they're high-fiving, shaking hands, and hugging each other
Yeah.
after they just beat the hell out of each other,
Yeah.
and just loving it. So
Yeah. Mike Stone posted today. He said, last time I was at the Battle of Atlanta was 1973. He said, I cannot believe the athleticism of even the youngest kids, the athleticism of these guys. He says, we never had anything like that. So if you have those PKA style rules and those SEKA style rules plus this athleticism, then you've got a sport that really it can be unequaled.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I love it. I love it. Well, hey, again, thanks for sharing the
My
time with me
pleasure.
today. Thanks
Thanks
for
for
being on the
having me.
show. And I look forward to having some more guests on this show. So, anybody watching, if you are a martial artist and have an amazing story, or any referrals for new people to come on the show, would love to have them. And Mr. Corley would love to have any of your referrals for people that we could have on the show in the future.
I will
And
give you bunches of them. Bunches. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, again, thank you so much. And guys, go out and make it a great day. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Mr.
Okay.
Corley.
Yes, sir.